first installment
Yes,
that you are here with us. I want us to start off with your younger self,
yes.
Unshaven, like myself. You were elected Secretary General in 1991.
Yes.
And in so doing, I guess you had your own political journey in the post-apartheid period, coinciding with the 3 decades that you often speak about when you're on the campaign trail. Just to kick us off, how different was the organization you now lead as the president to that which you kind of sat in the engine room of as Secretary General from 1991 onwards? I know there were fax machines then, but what are some of the things that you find different now inside of the organization?
Well, the ANC in 1991 was an ANC that was getting reborn in the hearts and the minds of our people, having been underground, having been obviously amongst our people. That's when we crafted the slogan, ANC lives and ANC leads, having been in exile, with many of our leaders having been chased out of the country in exile. So it was an ANC that was in the resurgence mode. It was rebuilding its structures. And I was elected at the 48th conference together with the president of the ANC, Nelson Mandela. And our task was to build the ANC. And so he spent most part of his time going around the country.
Not in the office.
Not in the office. You know, as they were released, it was quite interesting. As they were released from prison, we had set up offices for them in downtown Johannesburg. You will not believe it, how naive we were, because we even set up a room where they could rest and sleep during the day with beds and all that. And when we took them around, we showed them this. They said, "What is this? Do you expect us to spend our time in the office and sleeping?" They said, "No ways." So we were naive. We thought, okay, they were in their 70s, like I am now, but they were more energetic than I am. And so therefore, they spent from Tatu, Walter Sisulu, and all of them, they wanted to be out there. So it was a moment, an era of rebuilding the ANC, its structures. And that is the time I enjoyed most as Secretary General, as I interacted with our structures around the country, as we were holding conferences, general meetings, and what have you. But my journey as Secretary General was also, a bit cut short, because in the unions, I was like an organizer. I was organizing mine workers, and I wanted to repeat it full force in the ANC. But then I was launched into the negotiating process. And in many ways, that put paid to this energy of going around the country, building ANC structures. Then one had to concentrate on the real heart of our revolution, which was to bring about the change through negotiations, which we had opted for. So it was a most enjoyable time, a really wonderful time. And it was the best part was with working with the giants of our movement. Oliver Tambo, Nelson Mandela, Walter Sisulu, Chris Hani, and all of them, Thabo Mbeki, and all of them. It was a great season in the life of the ANC. So what is different today is that we've got really robust structures all over the country now. We went through the period of building, and now we have branches, like 4,468 branches.
In every ward?
In every ward of the country. So the ANC's presence is wall to wall, from the east to the west, from the north to the south. We exist as a living organism in every niche of this country. And that is the real change from what we were in 1991 to what we are today. And we're now in a period of, strengthening our structures and making them more robust. And I now see it more during the election period. Those structures have come alive and they are so energized and so active. And they don't have 2 or 3 or 5 people. A branch will have up to like 50, 100 volunteers who are out there all over the country. So that is the joy of being part of my ANC.
It wasn't always like this, Mr. President. I mean, if one reads the documents from the December 1994 Congress of the ANC, one of the issues that come up there is this challenge, for instance, of building structures in rural areas.
Yes.
Of trying to bring together disparate administrations in the public service. When you reflect now, in that 3-decade journey, what were some of the more memorable and notable moments and milestones in that journey of not only building the African National Congress as a mass organization, but also building a state, which is something that we heard from former President Mbeki, who was saying when they got into the union buildings, there was just a table, a desk, and a telephone. Just your memorable moments in both spheres, both in the organization, but also, I guess, in the public service.
I guess what we don't often talk about is how we had to align the ANC as a liberation movement with the life that it must now have as the governing party, because the responsibilities are enhanced when you are a governing party. And you still want to retain your revolutionary fervor. You still want to remain connected to the people. You still want to realize their aspirations. But at the same time, you now have a responsibility, not only for your ANC members, not only for your organization, but you now have a responsibility for all the people of the local area where you live as a branch or exist as a branch in the region, in the province, and the country. So that is what we needed to start growing up to, and to really grow, to have a growth as the ANC, to align ourselves with the demands of governing the country, the needs of meeting the responsibilities of our people. So as we got into government, we found almost like the shelves had either been emptied, rearranged, and we needed to build a unitary state that brought together, for example, like 13 different governments, so-called governments.
By that, do you mean like the Homeland Administration?
The homelands and the provincial administrations. So we needed to knit that all together into the unitary state that the ANC had always had as a key and central objective. One South Africa, as set out in the Freedom Charter. So, and also knitting together the civil services that existed and getting all those to align themselves with the ANC's as governing party now, ANC's policies, ANC's direction and ideology, because we're the governing party. Every governing party in the world comes with its own policies and orientation. So we needed to do that. So that in itself was quite a challenging task. And may I immediately say that we have lived up to that task as the African National Congress. It was a mammoth task, and I don't remember the history of any country where they needed to mesh together separate 13 or so different state entities, and we did. And in doing so, we sought to implement the lodestar of our revolution, the Freedom Charter, to unite the country, to build a nation, and to build a single civil service, a unitary state, and to ensure that it functions for all throughout the country. And for me, that is one of the key defining moments. With a country that had been balkanized, that had been divided, both formally as states to bring it together, the civil service, but also the whole thought process, the thoughts of many people were oriented towards division and bringing us all together and building a new nation. So that building of a new South African nation with an identity called South African was for us very important.
I think you make an important point, Mr. President, because it is certainly for the first time since 1910 that everybody within the territorial boundary of South Africa had equal claim to citizenship in that fashion. And I'm quite interested if I kind of counterpose that to many of the areas that many South Africans feel the ANC has made mistakes. The ANC has made strategic missteps. The ANC's achievements have also been subjected to strategic reversal. I'm interested in how you square this up in your thinking and in the thinking of your leadership, both within the terrain of the public administration and the public service across different tiers of government, but also if we accept that the ANC is not just an organization interested in the pageantry of electoral politics, but also, I guess, a social force in the society, where you also, in that guise, see some of the reversals, some of the missteps, and what some might argue are some of the tragic mistakes.
Yes. I want to follow up with the thread of what the key highlight achievements are. One of the key ones, which I touched on briefly, is the restoration of citizenship to the people of South Africa and dignity and the humanity as well. And that we did under the rubric of constitutionalism. We lived in a country where the governance of the country was so disparate. It was dependent on the whims and the feelings of those who were in Parliament in Cape Town. And just with edicts, the president would say this would happen. But what we did with adopting our constitution was not only to build a state, as I was saying, to introduce constitutionalism, the rule of law, the Bill of Rights, and by so doing, to ensure that we formalize who we are as South Africans, that our identity is wrapped up in adhering to rules and processes that are known by everyone and apply to everyone. And one of the key ones was to rid our country of racism in the more formal sense, to erase the racist laws in the main. We are not done yet. We still have to carry on with that process. But one of the key ones was also to restore the dignity that the women of South Africa should have had, because the ANC strategic objective, apart from democracy, was non-racialism and non-sexism. And of course, a prosperous country, which is a process that is still underway. But just bringing about equality between men and women, which is work in progress still, but also equality of treatment in the entire country through ridding our country of that central division of seeing people as black and white, and seeing people as ethnic, groupings. That, to me, is one of the key successes that we hardly ever talk of. And it's really at the heart of what the ANC fought for and what it had as a strategic objective. And of course, we'll talk about, what the key other achievements have been, the economy and all that. But coming back to your question.
Sorry, Mr. President, maybe just on the point you raised, because I think it is an important one. In a country where everyone is seen by an ethno-national marker, yes. You are correct, it is a qualitative advance to move to a society where everyone is treated in the same way, afforded the same amount of dignity. Yeah. When you see some of the kind of ethno-nationalism, tribalism, yes. federalism rear its ugly head. I mean, we saw in the Western Cape. We're seeing what we're hearing in certain parts of our country during the course of this electoral process and the campaigns that are underway. Would you say that you've succeeded? Yes, it might be out of the statute books that you don't have the promotion of Bantu Self-Government Act and 8 national units. But have we been able to kind of wipe that off in the minds and hearts of South Africans?
Having a single national identity has to be seen as work in progress. One of the major fault lines of the South Africa before 1994 was that division into races without uniting all of us. Now, we sought through our constitution, through adhering to the objectives of our struggle, to unite everyone and to close those fault lines, to make sure that we cement those fault lines. And because it's a process, sometimes they keep cracking. When the ANC was formed in 1912, the leadership then said, we must bury the demon of tribalism, the demon of division, and build one nation. And once we achieved our freedom, 82 years later, since 1912, in 1994, we then really started the process of implementing that. And it will take us some time. And along the way, there'll be cracks. But we are deeply rooted in the whole notion and the objective of having an unracial South Africa, of having a united South Africa, and will always strive to use the diversity that we all have, diversity between men and women, diversity between the national groups, to continue uniting this country. And of course, during the election campaign now, we're seeing how people are utilizing, almost tribalism by saying, we are this group and we must stay together. We want a particular area of our country to be excised and separated from South Africa, without really realizing that that was the real weakness that we had in the past, which was foreseen by those who formed the ANC and who, through their wisdom and vision, sought to obliterate that. Because reverting back to raw tribalism, to raw regionalism, just weakens us as a country, as a nation, and the strength that we have in our diversity, in our unity, is enormous. It is mighty. It's a mighty force. And we see it in how we are seen on the world stage. When people look at us, they say, you continue to be a miracle. You continue to be what we aspire to be, to have no divisions in terms of religion, sex, of gender, regionalism, and all that. You are the one model country in the world, they say, in terms of your adherence to human rights. So we gain strength by being one nation and shedding our divisions, shedding all these things that seek to break us apart. And we gain more strength in being united. And the fault lines, therefore, need to be worked on continuously through, education, through promoting our nationalism as South Africans. And that is why some of us will support, for young children, even at school, to be taught the history of their country, to be taught that divisions really weakened our country and even made our economy weak. And we can utilize the strength of all of us united to build a great nation, which is precisely what we've been working on since 1994.
And that process, as you were getting to, Mr. President?
Yes, that process, as you were alluding to, what are the mistakes? What are the areas where the weaknesses were sort of heightened? Of course, in the course of doing all that, in trying to adhere to the ideals of the Freedom Charter, we've made great advances, but at the same time, there have been mistakes. And there have been some reversals. And some of the mistakes have really been not doing things fast enough. And I'll give you a good example. We should, from day one, have focused on early childhood development. First 1,000 days. We're now 30 years later. It was only really in the 6th administration that I think we woke up and said, we need to focus on this. We'd been talking about it all along, but we felt we now need to focus on it and reclaim the upbringing, the education of the children who are scattered around without being in formal settings like proper creches and proper learning centers, early childhood development. We're now taking it into basic education, formalizing, because the education, the upbringing of a child in the first 1,000 days is what really makes a nation. And I regret that we've taken so long. We're only doing it now. So that was one of the mistakes. And of course, the other mistakes was just the delay in implementing a number of our projects, both infrastructure and otherwise. We've tended to be too laborious, too long-winded, and sometimes we tend to talk quite a lot about things and plan forever. And then when it comes to implementation, then we trip over ourselves by having long tender processes, and sometimes those being diverted. And then it opens up opportunities for corruption to set in. And sometimes we've appointed people who are not so well clued with what needs to be done. And we've also appointed people who have, diverse agendas. And that is where I think we have made mistakes. We have awoken to that. And now, coming into the next administration, we're going to be much quicker. We're going to be more alert to implementing even the resolutions of our conferences. There are those that have taken too long to be implemented, and I regret to say this. And we now need to be more active, more, energized to implement and those. So those are some of the mistakes, and there are many others that we have made. I mean, for instance, on infrastructure, it has taken us 17 years, for instance, to say we're now getting underway to build a massive dam in the Eastern Cape.
Why is that? I mean,
The yes.
has been around, planned since the 1950s. Why has it taken so long in democratic government's tenure?
Yeah.
to bring that across the line?
It's been because we have not connected our aspirations and dreams with the reality of doing it. For instance, the financing and coming up with innovative ways of funding projects like those. So we get really pumped up and say, we've got to do this. We even go for sword turning without the full planning process, and actually also making sure that we've got the requisite skills that are going to fully execute the plans that we have. So that has been a weakness, and which has led us to make mistakes. And therefore, it's one of those areas. And of course, one of the mistakes, which in my view is an overarching one, is that we've tended to be too, regulation focused. And we've set up very complicated regulations and even laws that hold us back, that make it difficult for us to be more sort of action-oriented. Agile. And as I've looked at some of the laws, some of them and processes, some of them have had to do with red tape. We set up so much red tape that it trips us over, and we're not able in the end to execute precisely what we need to execute. So that's one of the errors which I want us to get rid of in the next administration, which of course the ANC will lead once again. And as we get into that too, and I've asked every department right now to set out all those practices, regulations, rules and laws that hold us back, and to do a full catalogue of that, and then say, what is it in terms of our examination that we can put aside and still do everything in terms of the law without cutting corners and ridding our country of corruption and getting more and more qualified people to do the work, because that's what we need. And they are there. We just need to look around South Africa there. We've got so many people who are so well-versed, so well-educated. Whilst, of course, the skills revolution needs to get underway. But you do find pockets of a number of South Africans who we need to utilize to get this engine moving and pumping to achieve the ideals that are set up in the Freedom Charter. One of the joys I've always spoken about that I have is, much as we took a long time to implement one of the objectives or the aspirations set out in the Freedom Charter, was making sure that we have a minimum wage. It was set out in the Freedom Charter. It took us from 1955 to about 2017, 2018. That's when we achieved the dream of having a minimum wage. That immediately improved the lives of 6 million South Africans. So that to me was one of the highlights. Not so much because I'm a former unionist, but because it was the right thing to do and achieving that objective that was set out in the Freedom Charter.
You're making a very interesting segue into what I would like for us to have an economic discussion, Mr. Bailey. Because one of the things that I find interesting in the forward of the manifesto of the ANC for 2024 is this focus on, one, yes, dealing with poverty, but also addressing this question of income inequality.
Yes.
And it seems to me, if I look at the minimum wage, if I look at some of the amendments to the Companies Act around disclosures of some of the people who are earning a lot of money. In the country,
yes,
that there are a series of measures, and I would add to that social relief of distress grant, which I think many of us are hoping becomes a basic income grant.
Yes.
Talk to us about that, and to what degree that's a linchpin of the economic strategy of the ANC.
I was going to come to how we've gone about implementing the socio-economic rights that are set out in our Constitution. For us, that was a very key and important marker of how we can begin to address the issue of inequality and poverty through implementing the overriding objective of achieving equality. And through the socioeconomic rights, of course, there's the social part, where we've made tremendous progress, where in many ways, in my view, we've also economically empowered a number of our people, because I would argue that by ensuring that every South African has a right to education, when a person is educated, and we've enabled that right from when a child is born, the social grant or the child grant, and the grant that goes on until you're 18, and the school fee schools, as well school nutrition, as well as higher education assistance through bursaries, NSFAS. That is an economic enhancement measure. So those young people who have been part of this process, when they finally finish, they're economically empowered. So much as it may look like it's a social right, it is also an economic one. And beyond that, the other social right is, for instance, provision of housing. And sometimes we never really see it in economic terms. But when a person gets a house, they're economically empowered as well, because now they now live in a much more formal setting, and they're now able to have value in their hands, because that house, the houses that we're building now, are worth 160,000 each.
So that's something the household balance sheet.
That's on the household balance sheet. I was in the Western Cape when the MEC said, we're giving this house worth 160,000 to this old lady, but immediately that house is worth 400,000 rand.
In the market.
Yes. So we've given her an asset, which she never had. And if you look generations back, you will find that her family, generations back, were dispossessed of their land, of their other assets. It could be house, livestock, when they were forcibly removed. I can certainly trace it in my own family, on my mother's side especially, who were forcibly removed, and my own family with my mother and father, when we were forcibly removed from Western Native Township, where I was born, where we had a lovely house, and now we had to go and live in a 4-roomed house in Soweto. So that economic sort of asset that many families had were taken away. So what the ANC-led government has sought to do, much as it has done that through building 4.7 million houses, it has given an asset base to our people, fulfilling a social right in the Constitution, which has an economic sort of spin-off for our people. And on the economic side, I mean, yes, as we have dealt with situations, child grant and all that, but we have also had to deal with how we respond to crises. A crisis like COVID, where 2 million people lost their jobs within 18 months. We needed to come in, close the gap and the hole. Of course, UIF came in, but we then started a process of a more sort of immediate and now medium-term grant, which is the social relief grant, a distress grant, and it now will most likely mutate into a more long-term grant, more long-term assistance measures. In terms of dealing, as we set out in our manifesto, dealing with the cost of living that our people are really reeling under, we we have said we will continue to help families that are indigent, families that are in distress, by reducing the cost of living when it comes to basic services and giving assistance. One of the things we are going to be doing going forward is to really give economic assistance beyond just see, the 350 or 370, real economic assistance to a number of many sort of small micro businesses that we meet in our townships, in the rural areas. Our people are traders. They make things. They are more, and I'm finding this wonderfully out as we go through the villages and townships of our country, that they are more attuned to creating their own livelihoods in a variety of ways, running their own businesses, eking a livelihood out of the various activities around their lives. And we need to support them. We need to give them assistance. I've been meeting young people, medium-aged people, and older people doing business. And those are the people that we need to be giving more and more support to, so that we address this economic side of our people's lives that really drives their livelihoods.
I'm quite interested in this because historically, this is a sector that had been criminalized in the South African economy. I recall during the first few months of the lockdown, a notice coming from the city of Joburg saying all of the informal traders come to a certain place, you will be registered. And one of the things that becomes clear, or that became clear at that time, was that they might be informal, but they're certainly not disorganized.
Yes.
And so I'd be interested to understand, in the manifesto of the ANC, for that cohort in our economy, but also for another related cohort of small, medium, and micro enterprises, locked out of product markets in a concentrated economy, what's in it for them?
What's in it for them is that we want to enable them to operate. For instance, I've been saying, and I want us to really focus on it, to create markets in our rural areas, in our townships. What we've tended to see happening is how big investors have come into the townships, into the rural areas, set up big malls. And those big malls are really for big businesses. They are for the big supermarkets, the big clothing national chains. And they have locked out a number of indigenous, if you like, indigenous local businesses. They don't have space there. And they make things. I was in Chiawelo, where I grew up in Soweto. And as we were walking in the street, here is this lady. She's employed 4 people. They make the type of shirt you are wearing.
Dashiki.
Yes, a dashiki and a Madiba shirt.
That you won't find in a typical retailer.
You will not find in a typical retailer. And they make them so well. And they are operating in the backyard. And I argue that we need to take those businesses out of the backyard, put them in, if you like, an indigenous township market where everybody will throng, will come, and then they are then able to have a real market to sell. You find that in a number of African countries where you go, and I was once in Rwanda, and somebody said, here you can buy anything from a pin to, you know, a MiG jet fighter. That's what they said. He says, this is the trading place. And what is it? It's not like Sandton. It's not like the waterfront in Cape Town. It is a rural, indigenous type of market. It's got a wonderful smells and aromas and all that. And that is what we now need to set up, because that will be the trading place. And we will literally also be taking them away from single line street trading into a market, because then they just don't have, customers who happen to walk in that street. We bring people together in those type of markets. That's what we need to do, but also to support them. Of course, we're not a country that has a lot of money, but we do need to give support. And some of those who run really serious businesses who can be assisted to upgrade their businesses don't need a lot of money. They need know-how, they need access to finance. It can be bank, it can be venture capital, it can be various entities that we have formed in government, it can be a municipal fund or whatever. And we need to ensure that they get quick and easy licenses to trade so that they don't become a barrier. And that is where you localize even your production. Like the lady I met in Chawel, it's local. She goes and gets local material to make the Madiba shirt. And that then will bring about a real dynamic economy in our country and strengthen it. Yeah.
Now, Mr. President, I could want us to talk on the economy forever. So, but there's a few other matters I want us to address.
Yeah.
But just as we leave the economic discussion, South Africa joins a slew of other countries that are experiencing deindustrialization.
Yeah.
Some thinkers are arguing it is premature. And it's certainly one of the things that the democratic government is having to contend with. I certainly know in our small corner in trade policy, we're having to deal with that and contend with it.
Yeah.
This was a matter that was in the 2019 manifesto. It has returned to the 2024 manifesto. And just for the benefit of some of our viewers, some of the areas include localization, which you've just touched on, competition to intervene in some of these markets you're saying are concentrated. What is going to be different this time around in using all of these different instruments to get to an outcome where we, in the first instance, arrest the deindustrialization, but also lay the basis for reindustrialization?
One of the things that many people really never paid attention to is how the ANC conference in 2017 took a resolution that we should amend the Competition Act. Because the Competition Act was like more focused on things like, empowerment and all that. It was not really focused on increasing participation by the previously disadvantaged, by deconcentrating our economy. The IMF and the World Bank commented that one of the weaknesses of the South African economy is too much concentration, and that impedes it from having more actors, more economic actors as to grow our economy. And that has meant that we are like a vehicle that's operating, which has 6 cylinders, but operating only on 3. That's been one of the key weaknesses. And we took that resolution and we've now amended the Competition Act to allow the Competition Commission, which is an entity that is given the authority, the power to deal with deconcentrating our economy. What does that do? It opens up space, because if you look at our economy, it's a minerals, based type of economy, and rose from mining and all that. Yes, started industrializing, but even as it industrialized, the concentration was there. It didn't allow many players. And the other problem, of course, is that one of the greatest sins of apartheid was not enabling our people to be well skilled. The education, the apartheid education was aimed at blunting the skills of our people. So in the end, the skill base then was also small, and concentration was overarching in the country. Our people were prevented from being economic actors, and as a result, you've got an economy that's not operating on all cylinders. So through the Competition Commission, through the empowerment laws that we have passed. Yes, affirmative action. Yes, the broad-based Black Economic Empowerment Act. It has opened up space.
Even for workers, it seems.
Even for workers. The labor laws that we've put in place, and even the ownership of workers in the companies that they work for. We've enabled that. Now, people always look on the darker side of things like BEE and want to say it must be gotten rid of. And the argument is, you've got a constitutional provision which talks about equality. And how do you bring about equality which is stated in our constitution, which says you must pass laws that are going to enhance the empowerment of our people? And employment equity and the BEE legislation is aimed at that. Now, the Competition Act is also aimed at broadening ownership. The mining industry is one case in point, where we enacted that there must be equity participation by Black people, because the mining industry was forever and in a day, since 1867 when diamonds were discovered and 1888 when gold was discovered, was owned by white people. And Black people never had access to the minerals of their own country. And it had to be through laws that we began to change that. So broadening economic participation and enabling South Africans to be part of economic activity, broadening the pie, making sure that you've got more actors, deconcentration, and that in itself is going to position our country to further growth. Now, what are we going to do? We're going to continue implementing those laws, and the Competition Act is going to be put into full-blown implementation. And we've already seen that they've looked at sectors where there's too much concentration. And of course, you must expect that those who have proprietorship
Makes many people unhappy.
are going to resist, because some don't even want competition, and competition is good. Competition brings about innovation, creativity, more players, and for us who've suffered and reeled under oppressive and racist laws, it opens up the space. Young people are able to come in. People with new capabilities are able to come in to be key actors in our economy. And it is a joy to see many Black people becoming, real serious players in the economy. This building, this wonderful building where we're doing this recording, is owned by a Black couple, I am told. It's a beautiful building. You never had that in the past. And it fills us with joy to know that Black people are surging into a number of areas of the economy. Are we satisfied with this? No, we must speed it up, because many more Black people want to get into the economy. Yesterday, I was in Thabo Mfutsanyana in Maluti Apofu. Some young people came forward and said, President, we want to participate in the economy. But we're finding that whilst we are local people, our government tends to bring in people from faraway places, Johannesburg and Cape Town, and they say, we are here and we can do the work. We need the opportunity. And I support that, because that gives opportunities to localized people who can be economically active and create jobs in the area and give hope to young people as well as older people as well.
And I think initiatives like that also deal with this uneven spatial distribution of economic activity. Very much of this economy is still in the Gauteng City region, in eThekwini, in Gqeberha, and in Cape Town, and very little else. But as we shift from the economy, President, I'm quite interested, as someone who is still a bit younger on the spectrum, this cohort between 18 to 29 in our population, it constitutes just shy of a third of our entire population. But if I look at the voters' roll, they constitute around a fifth of all of those who have been registered to vote. That should be cause for concern, not just in your capacity as the president of the ANC, but even, I guess, as president of the Republic, about the confidence that that generation has in electoral politics as a space that can change their lives. Any thoughts on that, and how is the ANC thinking through that cohort across the population distribution in its campaign work?
What I can tell you is that we're not the only country that has this problem of younger people not wanting to participate effectively in the sort of political life of their own country. And it's not only the political life, it's also the social life and economic life where decisions are taken. They need to know that they can be part of that because it determines the type of life they want to lead and to have. So many other countries are finding that younger people tend to shy away and stay away. And for us, it is much more of an acute problem, which we need to address and which we thought we were making some progress in, because in the previous registration periods, less young people surged forward to register. This past one, we found that more young people were coming through, first-time voters were coming through, but we need obviously to do more. How do we need to do more? We need to incentivize them. They need to have a sense.
Incentivize? What do you mean?
Incentivize them.
Have parties?
No. They need to know that they need to play a role. Particularly have the keen understanding that by participating in the life of their country should also involve voting, because through that they make an impact on the laws that are made, the decisions that are made to make their lives a lot better. For instance, what we have sought to do to empower young people, they need to understand more that things like NSFAS have not, fallen from the sky. It's young people who embarked on, yes, fees must fall. They want to be supported in their educational journey. But we want to incentivize them to have a sense that, yes, you can take the decisions. You can be in cabinet. You can be in parliament. So for me, that should energize them to say, okay, this can be ours. After all, it is our future. What we've also sought to do is to focus many of our programs on giving attention to the needs of young people. And maybe the next question you would want to ask is, how are we going to address this youth apathy? And I would say we want to address it by raising their level of consciousness to realize that they need to get involved. This is about them, less about geezers like me who are 70-something years old. It is about them to build their own future. And they must ascribe to the slogan that says, nothing about us without us.
But Mr. President, are you ready for that in a meaningful sense?
Yes, I'm ready for that.
Okay.
Just as I've been ready forever to have more and more women participating in our structures. And we have, to a large extent, succeeded in getting more women, but giving them the dignity and the respect and the recognition that I think to a large extent we've succeeded. And it's been a concerted process. But we've also had the joy of having real active citizenry by the women of our country. And we now need to have more youth citizenry action by the youth of our country. They need to be more active because they need to know that this is about us. And am I ready for that? Yes, sir, I am.
As discomforting as it might be.
No, I don't see it discomforting. I see it, empowering and energizing, because young people And I find that even in my own cabinet, young people really come with fantastic ideas. They put fantastic ideas on the table. And to a large extent is by the fact that they've been modernly educated, are more, as young people, they're more full of ideas and they're brave and courageous. Much more than, I think, us.
Than the geezers.
Yeah, than the geezers. We need, I'm ready for that. And it's been a joy to have young people in the government system and in the ANC. Young people have also energized us. And you must remember that we have a history of this. It was in the 1940s that the ANC was revolutionized by young people. The Nelson Mandelas of those days and the Oliver Tambo of those days, they pumped a lot of activism in the ANC. And we were also, our revolution was also enhanced by the 1976 cohort that just took us to another level. So we've got to be ready for that, and we've got to embrace that.
As we wrap up, Mr. President, if you had any message to those young people, because it seems from what you've just shared that there is a generational passing of the baton. And I would argue that be it in statecraft, in the public service, or even in the broader project of nation formation, that your generation will pass on the baton to the coming generation. If we look at the next 5 years, just your reflections on this question. We often speak about it as social cohesion, or we speak about it as nation formation, or the national question. It does seem from time to time, you mentioned tribalism earlier, but we have all manner of other flare-ups that kind of show us that this issue of the national question is not resolved. It might be what we're calling xenophobia or Afrophobia. It might be some of the kind of balkanization that others are hoping for or dream of in South Africa. To the generation that will follow yours, what message, if any, would you say this is kind of the struggle for nation formation that you will receive? Take it further in these ways. But more importantly, how does this manifesto confront that issue and take it forward?
Well, you mentioned a very wonderful and interesting concept of passing the baton over to younger people. We've been in a race, and I'd like to believe that within the governing party, we've held the baton, and we now still running, but now we are handing it back, and we want those young people
to take it,
to come running. They must come running and at greater speed than us to take this baton. You have seen how these races are done, the relay races. It's wonderful to watch because the runner soon starts running out of steam, but they're still running, and the one who must take the baton must come at full speed to come and take the baton and take it forward. That is a wonderful imagery that I really like. And taking that baton, and this baton is filled with principles, with values, with what we have inherited from our forebears. It's filled with an ideology of building a nation, of getting rid of, as I was saying earlier, the divisions of the past, of full diversity of the South African nation, of ridding itself of, bad practices and xenophobia, sexism, racism, and regionalism. That is what this baton is. And they need to take this baton and run with it. And as they run with it, they must also be making it longer, so that it can be handed over to the next generation as the next generation takes it forward. Where have we come from? John Langalibale Dube, the first president of the ANC, handed over the baton to others. And, Nelson Mandela handed over the baton to Thabo Mbeki. Now it's been handed over to us. We must now take it, lengthen it, and give it to the next generation of leaders who must take this country forward, because this country has to be taken forward as a country that is open, that is diverse, that has embraced diversity, that has embraced full non-racialism, where we rid ourselves of all those very, very bad and backward practices and close the fault lines, because fault lines keep on resurging, reappearing, even in nation states that we think are advanced, much older. And you see it in a number of countries. I mean, all over the world, nationalism is resurging.
Crude, narrow.
Crude, narrow, and raw nationalism, and in other parts, xenophobia and all that. And we need to be safeguarding, you know, these principles that we were brought up with. We were breastfed on the best principles. And that is what we must now hand over. And the young people, in my view, the young people in the African National Congress are well adept. They are, you know, politically so well advanced, but we need to enhance that as well, so that this country can move forward under great leadership and under very good stewardship and management going forward.
Mr. President, we're going to have to leave it here for now. It is, of course, the first episode.
Yes.
So we mustn't cover everything.
Indeed. I was fearing that you want to cover everything.
No. But I want to thank you.
No, you're welcome.
For helping us to initiate this in this way.
Yes.
And we wish you and your team all of the best.
Thank you.
As you continue with the campaigns on the way towards the 29th of May.
Yes.
But thank you for popping in, taking the time to speak to us. We really appreciate it.
Yes. You grilled me. You grilled me so much.
No. I was soft on
you. Well, thank you very much. I think this has been very good. Thank you.